Have you ever walked into a room and just felt instantly overwhelmed? Like everything's too much, all the sounds, the lights, even smells.
Yeah.
For a lot of autistic women, that's not a once in a while thing. It's daily life.
Right.
So today we're going to take a deep dive into sensitivities in autistic women.
Okay.
We're going to be focusing specifically on how hormones play a role, and we've got a bunch of articles and blog posts to help guide us.
Sounds good.
So to get started, it's really important to understand that for many autistic women, these sensitivities aren't just about, disliking certain sounds or textures. It's about experiencing the whole world in a totally different way.
Yeah. It's definitely more than just a preference. It can really have a big impact on how they interact with the world around them.
I was actually really struck by a statistic that I saw in one of these articles. It said 80% of autistic women experience sensory processing difficulties.
Wow, 80%. That's a really significant number.
Yeah, so it's not just like a small subset of the autistic population, it's the majority.
Right. And to make it even more complicated, we have to factor in hormones. These natural hormonal fluctuations that women experience can actually amplify these sensory experiences.
Okay, so let's get into that a little bit more. How do hormones actually affect these sensitivities?
Well, think about estrogen, for example. It fluctuates throughout the month, and studies have shown that those changes, those fluctuations, can actually heighten sensitivity to light and sound for some autistic women.
Okay.
So you can imagine, trying to focus in a really bright office while you're dealing with the hum of computers and people talking and all that.
Yeah, I mean, even for somebody who, doesn't have sensitivities, that can be distracting. So I can only imagine, amplifying that.
Right, exactly. And for an autistic woman who is experiencing those heightened sensitivities because of hormones, it can be completely overwhelming, really debilitating.
Yeah, it's not just estrogen though, right?
Oh.
Are there other hormones that are impacting this?
Yeah, so for example, progesterone can actually affect the sense of touch. So something as simple as the texture of clothing could feel unbearable at certain times of the month.
Wow.
One of the blog posts we have actually talks about, this woman who describes certain fabrics feeling like sandpaper on her skin during specific points in her cycle.
Oh, that's awful. I can't even imagine how frustrating that would be,
Oh, yeah.
It's like you're, at the mercy of your own body.
Yeah. And then there's the thyroid, which can also get thrown off by these hormonal changes. And that can really mess with your internal thermostat, which can lead to being really sensitive to temperature.
Okay.
So imagine feeling freezing even when it's warm, or sweating like crazy when it's cool.
Yeah, like your internal temperature gauge is just totally off.
Exactly. And it's not just the discomfort, it's the impact it has on your ability to function, right? If you're constantly battling these temperature sensitivities, it can be hard to concentrate at work or engage socially or just even relax at home.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're talking about light, sound, touch, temperature, all potentially being amplified by these hormonal fluctuations. And it's not just like a minor inconvenience. This is something that can really significantly impact an autistic woman's well-being.
Absolutely. And it kind of brings us to another important point. These hormonal shifts don't just affect sensory sensitivities. It can have a ripple effect on your mental and emotional well-being, too.
Okay.
That's where things get even more complex.
So you're saying that autistic women might be more susceptible to mental health challenges because of these hormonal fluctuations.
Yeah.
Is there research that backs that up?
Yeah, actually.
We've been talking about how hormones can really intensify those sensory experiences for a lot of autistic women.
Right.
But there's this whole other layer to all of this. And it's something that I have to admit I haven't thought a lot about before. Could what we eat actually be playing a role in how we experience, the world around us?
That's a really interesting question. And, it's an area of research that's starting to get more and more attention. There's growing evidence that suggests that autistic individuals in general might be more prone to food sensitivities and intolerances.
So we're not just talking about being a picky eater. We're talking about actual, physiological responses to certain foods.
Exactly. It goes beyond just, disliking something. It's really about the body having an adverse reaction, and it can trigger all these unpleasant symptoms.
Okay, so what kind of symptoms? Is it just digestive issues, or can it be broader?
It can definitely be more than just your digestion.
Okay.
I mean, bloating and gas and diarrhea are pretty common, but some people experience skin problems too, like eczema, headaches, brain fog, and even changes in behavior, like feeling more anxious or irritable.
Wow, so something as simple as what you eat could have this like ripple effect on your whole system, even your mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, isn't it? And what's even more interesting is that some experts think that these food sensitivities could actually make sensitivities in autistic women even worse, especially when you combine that with hormone fluctuations.
Wait, so what you're saying is what I eat could actually make my sensitivity to like light or sound worse?
That's the idea, yeah. Basically, when your body's already dealing with, inflammation or digestive problems because of food sensitivities, it can make all those sensory inputs feel even stronger. So it makes it even harder to process and deal with all that external stuff, like it's adding fuel to the fire.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But it also feels like really overwhelming. Like if somebody suspects that food is playing a role in their sensitivities, where do they even begin?
That's a good question. And I think it's important to say that, it's a journey. There's no quick fix.
Yeah.
You need some patience and self-compassion, and you got to be willing to experiment. But one good place to start is by keeping a food journal. Write down everything you eat and drink and any symptoms you have afterwards.
So basically, become a detective of your own diet.
Exactly, yeah. You'd be surprised what you can learn just by paying attention to what your body's telling you. For instance, one study found that a lot of autistic women who cut out gluten from their diet said that their digestion got better and they felt less sensory overload.
Really? Wow. Okay, but eliminating gluten's a pretty big step.
It is.
Are there ways to, approach this that aren't quite so drastic?
Oh, yeah, for sure. You could start by just cutting back on processed foods and sugary drinks and artificial ingredients. Those things are known to cause inflammation.
So food journaling, cutting back on those things, those are good first steps. But what if somebody wants to, really get specific and figure out which foods are a problem?
Right. Well, in those cases, an elimination diet can be really helpful, but you should definitely do it with the help of a doctor or a dietitian.
Okay.
It involves taking out certain foods from your diet for a while, like gluten or dairy, and then adding them back in one at a time to see if your symptoms come back.
So you're, literally eliminating things.
Exactly. And it might take some time, but it can really help you pinpoint exactly which foods are causing you problems.
And I imagine working with a doctor or dietitian is key for this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important to do elimination diets under the guidance of a healthcare professional, just to make sure that you're still getting all the nutrients that you need.
Are there any other tools that can help people, figure this stuff out?
Yeah, there are some tests you can get done to check for food sensitivities, like IgG antibody testing, but it's important to remember that, there's some debate about how accurate and reliable those tests are.
So proceed with caution on those and always talk to your doctor.
Exactly. And the main thing is to remember that managing these sensitivities shouldn't feel like you're depriving yourself. It's about finding what works best for you, making changes that you can actually stick with that support your well-being in the long run.
So it's about taking control of your own health and well-being one bite at a time.
Exactly. And that feeling of empowerment is really important when we start talking about the emotional side of living with sensitivities as an autistic woman.
Okay.
Because that's a whole other piece of this, right?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we've been talking about, those physical, internal aspects of sensitivities, but there's this whole other dimension to this, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Imagine navigating a world that's not designed for your sensory needs.
Right.
You're constantly feeling overwhelmed or misunderstood. It can really take a toll on, your self-esteem, your relationships, your sense of belonging. It's almost like there's this invisible barrier that other people can't see or understand.
We've spent the last couple parts of this deep dive looking at how hormones and even food can impact sensitivities in autistic women.
Right.
But now I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and explore something that's often overlooked but really important, and that's the emotional side of living in a world that can honestly just feel really overwhelming.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. It's one thing to understand, the biology behind it all.
Right.
But it's a whole other thing to actually deal with this social and emotional impact of having these heightened sensitivities.
One of the blog posts we have talks about this feeling of constantly walking on eggshells, like you never know what's going to set off a sensory overload.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine walking into a busy coffee shop. You've got the espresso machine going, cups clinking, people talking.
Yeah.
All those sounds just kind of blend together into this this wall of noise that can be super jarring.
Right.
And for someone with auditory sensitivities, it can really feel like an attack on your senses.
And it's not just the sound either, right? It could be the lights, the smell of the coffee, even how the chair feels when you sit down.
Exactly. It's like all those sensory inputs kind of pile up on top of each other, and it can quickly become way too much.
Right.
And the thing is, it's usually invisible to other people,
Right.
and that can lead to feeling really isolated and frustrated.
I think that's a really key point, this invisibility of it all.
Yeah.
If someone breaks their leg, it's obvious that they need help,
Right.
but with sensory sensitivities, it's not always so clear.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that can make people feel misunderstood or even judged. People might think you're being difficult or oversensitive,
Right.
when really you're just experiencing the world differently.
Yeah, and that can make social situations really, really hard. I was reading about an autistic woman who described going to parties as like walking through a sensory minefield.
Wow.
She loved being around her friends, but the noise and the crowds would always leave her feeling drained and anxious.
Yeah, that's a really common experience. Even something as simple as a hug can be overwhelming for someone who's sensitive to touch.
So, what can autistic women do to deal with these emotional challenges? It seems like there's a lot stacked against them.
There is, but there's also a lot of strength and resilience within the autistic community. I think one of the most important things is to practice self-acceptance. Embrace who you are, including your sensitivities.
So it's about recognizing that your sensitivities are a part of you. They don't define you, but they do shape how you experience the world.
Exactly. And once you start to accept yourself, you can start setting boundaries.
Okay.
That might mean saying no to certain social events or carrying earplugs and sunglasses with you.
Right, yeah.
Or even just stepping away from a situation when it feels like too much.
So it's about taking care of yourself and asking for what you need.
Exactly. And, self-care is not selfish. It's essential. Doing things that make you happy and help you recharge, whether that's listening to music or spending time in nature or pursuing your interests,
Right.
those things can make a huge difference.
I'm glad you mentioned interests. So many autistic women have these incredible passions and talents that come from their unique way of seeing the world.
Absolutely. And finding your people, connecting with other autistic women who get it, who understand your experiences,
Yeah.
that can be so validating. It's about creating a community where you can be yourself, sensitivities and all.
There's real power in knowing that you're not alone in all of this.
Right.
And don't forget about professional support, too.
Yeah.
A therapist who specializes in autism can give you some really great tools for dealing with these emotional challenges.
For sure.
They can help you develop coping mechanisms, build self-esteem, and advocate for your needs. And, to our listeners, if you're feeling overwhelmed, please know that you are not alone.
Yeah.
There are resources out there, there's support, and there's definitely hope.
Embrace your sensitivities, honor your needs, and find your tribe. The world needs your perspective, your empathy, your creativity.
You're a valuable part of this world, and your sensitivities are a source of strength, not weakness. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of sensitivities in autistic women. We hope you learned something new, and even more importantly, that you feel empowered to navigate your own journey with greater understanding and self-compassion.